I'm here today with Mark Boyns, who's the founder of mental health organisation Opening Up. Mark, thanks very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Now, for those who might not know what Opening Up is and what it's about, can you give people an insight into what your organisation does?
Yeah, we promote mental well-being and suicide prevention through cricket. So we've done that since 2014, and we do that through a variety of ways in the UK at the moment, but looking to spread as far and as wide as possible.
Yeah, and I know that you've got cricketers and athletes who are getting the Opening Up shirts and bat stickers, and it is becoming a global brand as well. So you've got athletes in Australia who are supporting it as well?
Yeah, we've got a few guys in Australia. We've had principally people in the UK, but picking up support from across the cricketing world, which hopefully once people start to see what the message is, they get behind it and it just snowballs from there.
Awesome. And now, why did you start Opening Up?
Well, I started it on the back of a tragic experience at my own cricket club in Liverpool, where we lost a friend and teammate, a guy called Alex Miller, to suicide. So in response to that, there was a lot of things going on where people were trying to piece things together and work out what happened and why, and principally what we could do to avoid that happening in the future. So we settled on the idea of trying to reach people through the sport that he loved the most, and show that cricket has a lot of the benefits and in some ways answers to some of the problems that go on, but mainly to use it as a route to reach people directly with a message that they might avoid otherwise.
And obviously the name Opening Up is has a double meaning. Obviously as a cricketing term, as a batter, you open the innings, you open up, but in a deeper sense, in a human sense, it's about speaking.
Yeah. And
that's one of your catchphrases, is it's not weak to speak.
Yeah, so we use that as a tagline to say on the two levels that we look at. One, it's not weak to speak if you've got a problem, if there's something that's bothering you that needs attention, but also at the other end of it, we think about the best teams and the conversations that you've had with various players and coaches and so on. The best people in sport communicate well, so we're trying to tap into that and saying it's good to talk on a number of different levels.
Yeah, awesome. Now, mental health sometimes can have a stigma around it, but I think in recent years it's becoming more and more accepted or open, and people talk about mental health more and more. It obviously still has a long way to go, and that stigma needs to be broken, but what is mental health?
Yeah, that's often something which people, when they talk about it, will assume they know what it is, and the conversation a lot is still around the negative end of it, when in fact mental health exists on a continuum where you can have good mental health, bad mental health, and anywhere in between. And in fact most people, like with their physical health, there will be somewhere in between. But I think the simplest and best way of defining mental health is to describe it as your condition of how you are emotionally, how you deal with situations, how you respond to them, and how you deal with the good and the bad in your life.
Absolutely, and I've found it really interesting. To the last few days, Mark and I have been travelling around the UK doing some talks together on mental peak performance, and a lot of our messages cross over, but I found it really interesting about your continuum, your line of continuum, and when you think about it with your physical health, you often might have a few little niggles and a few little injuries, and you sort of aren't quite as fit as when you're feeling really good and really fresh and you're up this end of it. And that's obviously the same with your mental health.
Yeah, people will be really good at, say, understanding what makes them operate at peak performance physically. They'd look at avoiding certain things, they might look at different training routines, and it's exactly the same with mental fitness as well. People can do things which embed really good processes or can insulate them to some extent from problems and help them deal with them better, so that in a sport like cricket, where decision making's king, you've got the ability to have the tools to operate at the kind of level you want to.
Absolutely. Now, for our viewers who might not know much about mental health, how do you spot a decline in your own mental health or someone else close to you?
Yeah, a lot of the time the signs and the symptoms will be things which are centred around any big changes. So no one needs to be going away and having to be an expert on it and spotting clinical things. Big changes such as changes in appetite or sleep will often be a couple of indicators that something's not quite right. Also, if people are starting to lose interest in things that they usually would be really keen on, and withdrawing from those kind of situations. Because it's your mind, if there's things like a lack of concentration in some cases, perhaps people finding it difficult to actually get their words out and communicate in the same sort of ways, along with maybe resorting to things to kind of self-medicate, where people might hit the booze a bit more or be taking risks with drugs and certain behaviours. So I would say to anyone that to spot within yourself there'd be particularly a continuous low mood, maybe thoughts that are quite intrusive, ones which you think to yourself afterwards, I didn't want to think that, but I was. But for others, it's spotting those big changes and how people might not be like they usually are. And a doctor would then be able to go through what exactly that means. But as good teammates or coaches or friends, we can spot that within people that we see regularly.
Absolutely. Now, what is the best thing to do or advice to give someone who's told you they are struggling with their mental health?
Yeah. First of all, the fact that they would have confided in you and spoken to you about it is a great first step. And the process there really is to continue the talking. In the UK, we've got the NHS. In other parts of the world, we've got similar medical care that's available. The doctor is there just as much for your mental health as they are your physical health, and they'll be able to point towards the appropriate services. But if someone is a little bit reluctant to engage with that straight away, then there's lots of things available in terms of talking, but again, to someone who might be a bit more detached from it and professionally can take on that load. Because often what we'd get is, if say someone was speaking to me and said they've got this issue and so on, you want to help your friend, you really do, but you've got to remember that if they're piling all that onto you, that's a difficult thing to deal with as well. So to get someone towards the professional help is the most important thing. Again, drawing a parallel with physical health, if someone was talking about an injury that they had there, you'd certainly want to help and you'd do what you can in the short term, but you wouldn't be expected, you or I, to treat a back injury or a shoulder injury. Would be getting towards the medical assistance.
Absolutely, but something that I've learnt through my own understanding of mental health is being a good listener is incredibly important, isn't it?
Yeah, and a couple of tips actually I'd give on that is, yeah, if someone's spoken to you, has opened up the conversation about mental health, then the best way to listen, and apologies if this sounds a little bit like telling people the obvious, is to just do that, not to try and find solutions, not to try and give them an immediate answer, because often this will be the first time that they put it into words and they just want to get it off their chest and release it. So people being non-judgmental, taking it and perhaps offering verbal cues to be able to say things like, yeah, okay, I understand. And a great thing to do at the end of a conversation like that is to summarise, to check that you've understood what they've said, and that person then realises you have actually been listening rather than just paying lip service to it. Another one would be if there is someone has spotted some of those signs or a difference or a change in someone close to them, and they might broach the subject and ask them if everything's okay and if they want to talk about it. Often people will say everything's fine and they don't want to talk about it, they're not quite ready. The key there is to keep the conversation as an option for them and say, well, okay, I'm not going to pressure you, but please know that you can speak to me in the future. And we found that a lot with different examples where someone might not want to that particular instance, but then later on will know that person's someone they can trust and they will open up to them later on.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about the line of sort of a continuum from really good optimal mental health to low mental health. What is the difference, I suppose, between feeling down and maybe feeling down for a little while and actually potentially having a mental illness?
Yeah, I'd say it would be for people to understand that the length of time that something occurs over. So it's natural, it's actually expected, and it's probably a good thing in our lives that we don't just have all good and we have these dips and we have challenges that we deal with, because then when we come out the other side we appreciate what we've got more. But I would say the difference between a low patch and then something which is more pronounced moving on to an illness would be the length of time that it happens, and if there's symptoms that emerge around just that dip or that low mood. So some of those things I mentioned earlier, if they're occurring at the same time over a period of time, say a week or a couple of weeks or longer, then that would be worth someone then be looking towards getting that assistance. That said, if someone was displaying displaying symptoms or signs of just having a low mood or going through a bad period, then that's of course something that they want to speak about, because we talk a lot about mental illness, and when we talk about the real tragic instances of people taking their own lives, for the most part that will be someone who's had an interaction with a mental illness or something that can be diagnosed or has been diagnosed. But equally, sometimes people's decision making when it's off because their health isn't quite good, even without something that's a diagnosed disorder, will end up meeting that end. So we've got to say that the conversation should exist irrespective of whether there's an illness involved or not.
Absolutely, and the more there is a conversation, the more people feel they can open up. Now, a little bit more on yourself and your story. You're a cricketer yourself. You're still playing in the Liverpool League. But you also have had your own struggles, and you sort of are doing this because of Alex's story, but it's also something that's quite close to you.
Yeah, so I played cricket with Alex, and he was someone who put an incredible amount of time into his game. For me, probably in contrast to the people you usually interview, cricket for me is a hobby. It's something for recreation, and something that I've had limited success at, if we put it that way, over the years. But for me, yeah, I set it up because of Alex. But one of the reasons why I was such good friends with him is because he was someone that I could talk to about my own mental illness, and something which even when I was running this campaign or organisation, I'd not spoken enough about. And I'd had the point in my life where I was very close to doing what Alex did, and I've had some times even since then in the intervening years where things have got really bad. But what I noticed the last time that I had an episode of depression was that through this campaign and through the information and the education that I've been able to give myself, I knew what I could do to get things better. It wasn't a magic, it wasn't a switch where I could just say, oh right, I'm not depressed anymore, but it was knowing what things to access, and the most important thing, which I say all the time to people who maybe come to me and say they're displaying these kind of signs, is the knowledge that it can get better, and it does get better, is the most important thing to have there. So for me, I use a lot more of my experience now that I'm more comfortable talking about it, and everything that I mention about things to spot in bad mental health, but then the good, the optimal, I do all of those things as well, so I can say to people authentically, it works, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely, and I think the fact that you're now opening up on a larger scale to a big audience and sharing that you've been through it, and that there might still be an episode of depression in the future, and you've had one since that sort of tough time, but I think that really gives a lot of power to the listeners and the people that you're educating, that it is okay and things do get better, and you're obviously getting on with your life as well.
Yeah, because I think the thing that we get is some people might have, say, an instance of mental illness where it's a one-off in their life related to a particular event, and then they move out of that and they never have an interaction with it again. For myself, my diagnosis was around it being things that weren't related to events. Events could make it worse, but it'd be something which is more to do with the chemical makeup of my mind and all the science behind that. So I've learned to accept that it may well be at another point in my life I do encounter that illness, just like people who have things that they take tablets for the whole of their life, whether it be due to diabetes or something like that. So for me, it could have been off-putting, thinking, oh, this could come again. But now it's a case of recognising that is something that I live with, and it's something that I learn all the time to try and put things in practice. So if it does come back, it doesn't come back as bad, or if it is a bad episode, then I know I can deal with it and I can get out the other end.
Excellent, excellent, and you're doing such a fantastic job with opening up, so good on you, mate. Now you've talked about sort of getting out of episodes of depression and doing things to help yourself that you've learnt about through opening up. You're big on gratitude. How did you first come across gratitude, and what is gratitude?
Yeah, I said, like we had that in the last couple of nights, these sessions, that I was just gutted I didn't know about this before. It's such a liberating concept. I came across this through the Resilience Project, which comes out of Melbourne in Australia, and Hugh, the guy who runs that, did a video where he was explaining his experiences of being in a really deprived part of the world where he'd been visiting there, and he was just struck by the fact that, as you know, the Western world often will have people going around looking like the world's about to end, looking really downbeat, with all the things that you need around you and more. And then there were these poor kids who he was coming into contact with, who had nothing, no access to clean drinking water within miles, no food, very limited education, but were running around with smiles on their faces. And that seemed to connect with him as something that maybe we're getting it wrong and we should approach it differently. So really simply, the process of gratitude in the way that's explained there and how other people practice it is to take some time in your day to reflect on what you are grateful for. And that will typically be perhaps first thing in the morning or last thing at night, writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. And that could be something very base, such as you've got your health or you've got your family or so on, or it might be something very particular that you've experienced that day. I tend to do that alongside writing down 3 things that have gone well, either in the day before or in the day that's just gone, to be able to say, well, in actual fact, even though life's full of lots of challenges and difficulties, there's always things that you can come back to and say, that's gone well and that's something that I've achieved or that I have, which in a lot of these cases, the vast majority of the world won't have. And it's not about saying your situation is great and you can't moan, but it's just a little bit of reorienting to say, in actual fact, there's a lot of good here.
Absolutely, and it's something that I practice almost daily whenever I can, and whenever I should do it daily without any excuse, but when I'm traveling, maybe I'm not doing as much as I should. But my wife Becca and I, we both do it, and it does really have an impact on how you view the world. It really makes you thankful and grateful for little things, such as having a blanket to sleep with or having cold running water whenever you want, because as you say, not all of the world has these things, and when you become grateful for them, it retrains your mind to look out for those things. And that there's some science behind that.
Yeah, well, I found out through the Resilience Project there was a study done by the University of Massachusetts which showed the impact of this process of gratitude. And they discovered that after 30 days of following a method that we've spoken about, your mind starts to scan for the positive. And then around about a month and a half, that becomes embedded. And from that point, you're really having to try and break that cycle. And why, after starting to see the world more positively and be grateful more, would someone want to break that? So the science proves it, and when we're at sessions saying to people, you've got to give it a go, it sounds like you're trying to sell them something. Well, you are, but it's completely and utterly free, and it takes perhaps seconds or minutes a day.
And it has a lasting impact on your life. Now, another sort of technique, I suppose, for your mental well-being is practicing mindfulness and meditation. How do you practice mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, it's a tough place to start because a lot of the talk about, say, meditation as a term has a lot of misconceptions around it, and people would have a stereotype of who they think practices it. But when we move more towards talking of mindfulness, it's really the process of training your attention muscle. And we were chatting the other day about how different sports might use a term in a different way, saying helping you get in the zone, and people might buy into that a bit more. But it's again very simple. This is something where you can have a guided meditation where you might use an app. I use Smiling Mind, but there's Headspace, there's plenty across the different platforms. And this will be a few minutes a day where you're focusing just on one thing and one thing alone, where we might think that we can do that, but with all the distractions in the world, to actually put your focus just on one thing is quite a difficult skill. And they'll do it through focusing on your breathing, or in some more advanced ones it might be on just focusing on what you're eating, or the sounds around you, the smells. And that performs 2 purposes. One is to be able to give yourself the chance to switch off from a busy world that's around you, kind of clear your mind and just look at one thing. But also from a performance perspective, whether that's cricket or somewhere else in your life, that's the potential then to practice just focusing on one thing, whether it be the bowler coming in and you're facing up, or if you're at work and you've got a deadline to meet, rather than going on the social media and chatting to someone, actually saying, right, this 10 minutes, I've got to get on with that. So the process is guided through an app. I mean, as people get more into it, they'll often guide themselves in a meditation. But if you think of all the time that we can spend on our physical fitness, hours in a gym, running, net sessions and so on, the gratitude and the meditation can be something which is around 15 minutes a day. And I think, instead of thinking, why would I do it, you've got Cristiano Ronaldo, you've got Kobe Bryant, you've got Justin Langer, the great sports people across the world who all swear by taking some time to meditate.
Absolutely, and it's something I wish I did from a young age, and it's something I now encourage my athletes to do. My mum used to say to me, I want you to meditate, I want you to meditate, and I had the stereotype of, no, that's for hippies. But if she or someone came to me and said, I want you to learn to focus your attention so you can get in the zone more often, I would have said, yeah, let me do it. But it was that sort of thought of meditation isn't for me. But my wife, Becca, then got me into it. She did a meditation course, and I did the same 6-week course. And again, it just gave me such clarity and such a great feeling during and afterwards of calmness. And it transferred into my cricket as well, which I think from a performance point of view and a mental health point of view, I think it has nothing but great upside. Now, going back to opening up and your organisation, which you now are doing full-time, you've just finished off your full-time job. You travel around the UK at the moment, giving talks and presentations about your message and your ideas to cricket clubs. And what else does opening up do?
Yeah, that's the principal focus. And now that I've finished my old full-time job, certainly for this next year, just throwing myself into this to see the amount of clubs I could reach in my spare time. That should hopefully mushroom and be able to get to a lot more. So we do sessions with clubs where we'll talk about kind of the basics, the introduction to positive mental health, the things we've been talking about here. But we've also done some workshops for coaches where we do a more extended one to try and get coaches to think about how they could embed that well-being, particularly with younger players. So we're thinking, we wish we'd meditated when we were younger. If people are working with their young under 9s, under 11s, how can they embed those kind of things there? We've also started doing a little bit more around trying to overlap with performance, so some of the things we've been doing, and we've had a couple of workshops where we've had some professional players talking about techniques, that how they deal with things like stress, dealing with failure, the pressures, the challenges, so that amateur players can use that, yeah, of course, in their game of cricket, but also they can say in their own job, oh, that kind of technique might be useful. And we're really trying more and more with the time that's now available to get more of an online presence, so that we can use those really powerful channels to reach out to people who might not be sat in front of us at a session, so that they can get something from that, but then hopefully get themselves booked in for a session so we can do it face to face.
Awesome, awesome. Now, you mentioned the session you did with some of the pros. You've been telling a story the last few nights while we've been presenting about one particular guy who's played 15 years of professional cricket and dealing with failure, accepting failure. Do you mind sharing that with our listeners and viewers?
Absolutely. So we were talking a lot about the idea of failure and how cricket can be seen as a game that's based on failure. And Graham Fowler in his book said that as one of the main messages. And when we take that on face value, we'd think, oh, why do we bother? Why do we play it? When in actual fact, we've had a couple of players that we've come into contact have said, well, actually, they would regard, if they were to regard themselves by the numbers, then they're a failure. So this guy's saying he's got about 25 first-class hundreds, but would judge a success on having scored 100. Now, over the course of a 10-15 year career, you've got plenty of innings in there, so if you're just saying those 24, 25 knocks are the successes, then most of the time you're failing. Even if you drag that down to 50s, again, most of the time you're, in quotes, failing. So it's how to deal with that and how to ride that kind of storm of thinking, well, I'm up here when I've scored 100, I'm down here when I've scored 0. And something you were saying the other day about the best players being level and realising that these things come and they go, but if you're doing the right thing in preparation, then you'll get the results. And as an overlap, we talk with groups about stress and strains and how to deal with that. And the big thing in dealing with stress, I think more than anything, is being able to develop an awareness that whatever's going on, it will pass. If it's good, it will pass, but if it's bad, it will as well. And you only really get that knowledge by being able to self-reflect through things like meditation and gratitude. But yeah, the example of the pros who we've spoken to and saying, well, yeah, failure is a big part of the game. You can't push it away and hide from it. Even Virat Kohli or Joe Root have failures. So we've got to say, well, what do we use it? Are we just going to say, oh, that's something where I'm going to be gutted, I'm going to be devastated? Or do you learn from it and do you say, right, I'll pick something from that, or I accept it? Part of life, part of the game, on to the next week.
Absolutely. It's one of my big messages at the moment, is that accepting and almost embracing failure and just realising it's part of the game. And if you can do that, you move on a lot quicker and it allows you to have success a lot sooner. Now you mentioned self-reflection. What does that look like in a practical sense, and does that help people with their mental well-being?
Yeah, it's really crucial. I'd say you can use this as part of that gratitude process in keeping a journal or a diary, and the reflection can be on, say in cricket, your game or your training session, to work out what you think went well, what you think didn't go so well. But I think the crucial thing then is to build in what you're going to do perhaps next time, what you can learn from it, what you can take from it. And I'd say in sort of general life, that self-reflection can be when you are struggling with things and maybe you're having anxieties about the way things are going. And a really useful tip and a tool to use there is, if you are having this kind of worry and anxiety and concern about things, to self-reflect by writing down what it is that you're worried about, and then taking it from a rational perspective and challenging it. So a common anxiety for people is that a social situation they've been in they think hasn't gone well and people are going to think they're an idiot. So you could put that down, and then the rational response would be, well, the other person or the other people in that, they've got other things going on in their life rather than just thinking about what you did. You know, you tripped over, dropped a cup of tea. Well, okay, they might have thought at the time that looked a bit daft, but they're certainly not spending the rest of their day going, oh God, he dropped a cup of tea. Of course they wouldn't. So trying to rationalise that and self-reflect can then balance it out and make people think, yeah, that they don't find everything so on top of them. But I would recommend to anyone to keep some form of diary. And again, their perception in the past for me would have been the only people that keep diaries are teenage girls, and they're writing about who they fancy and all of this kind of stuff, when actually getting it out on paper, maybe reading it, is a fascinating experience, because you can then look at it weeks later and think, what bothered me then, actually what's come to pass, it wasn't something to worry about at all. And that could be in your game, thinking, we're playing this team at the weekend and I'm worried about this guy. Well, who knows? You can't control that. It could be that something out of your control happens that's good. The guy pulls up with a strain and doesn't actually bowl, the guy you were worried about, or that guy does bowl, but in the game, you worrying during the week's not helping, you're actually dealing with it. So self-reflection, being honest, being authentic with yourself, it's difficult to expose your feelings to people. I mean, I've come to be able to do it simply because I thought from the very worst times, I don't feel embarrassed talking about it, because I know how bad it is when I haven't. But it's not for everyone to be able to do that necessarily. So writing it down and being self-reflective, just with yourself, is a really good way of getting some of those negative thoughts or some of those challenging thoughts out of your head and working out a way to deal positively.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, you're off to Australia in September. What does that trip hold for you?
Yeah, a little bit of what we've been doing in the UK. So I'm going to various cities and hubs there to make contact with some different clubs and organisations to hopefully have them get involved in our sessions, but also maybe leave something behind for people to pick up and expand there. But I think it's just a great opportunity to show people on the other side of the world how we've approached things in the UK, but also being able to say it's exactly the same message. We speak the same language in two ways. We speak English and we also speak the language of cricket, so the message is really transferable. But for us, it's really exciting to be able to get out there and say, look, we've done this in the UK. We're screaming out to other people to say, if you can, get on board with these kind of messages, because you'll undoubtedly improve as a cricketer, but perhaps, or definitely more importantly, you'll improve as a person.
Excellent, and that's one of the things we're big on at Cricket Mentoring, is helping people become better cricketers, but also helping people become better people and understand themselves a bit more. And we've done a couple of talks, a couple of presentations the last few nights here in the UK, and we're going to be partnering up again when you come to Australia and you're in Perth, so we're looking forward to that. Now, what else is coming up for opening up in the future?
Yeah, we're looking to certainly keep this expansion going to reach all parts of the UK, to build on the kind of sessions that we've had. But I think the big thing going forward would be for us to get the message more and more towards promoting that positive peak mental health. We spent a lot of time, quite rightly, on helping people identify the signs and the symptoms of declines, but what I've become really, really enthused and passionate about is giving people the tools to look after mental health positively. Because in this country, I'm sure it's the same in others, we have a very reactive approach to it. We wait until there's crisis and then we try and deal with the fallout from that, and that costs governments a lot of money in medical assistance and care. But if we're able to educate people a bit more about what you can do to promote good mental health, then people, as they're doing that, can automatically recognise that there is that scale, and they look out for people a little bit more, and the conversation just moves past the bleak. And we've broken the stigma to a large extent. That needs to carry on, but we're now really looking in the next phase to get more people aware about things like gratitude, meditation, the importance of physical exercise, journaling, self-reflection, and dozens of other things that people could do that are right for them, but knowing that there's things out there to improve your mental health or fitness, just like we know they're there for your physical.
Yeah, well, and that's something we haven't spoken about, is your physical health, and physical training actually helps your mental health as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's so many examples of the science as well as just the more soft touch things, which physical health will help your mental health. And that's not to say someone who's physically fit will automatically be mentally fit, but if we're looking at the quickest route to being able to get a boost in mood or mental health and move towards optimal mental health, it's through physical health, through the attainment of it, through the chemicals that are produced by your brain, the serotonin that then floods through your body after that. So that would be one which I'd say to anyone, if they're wanting to say, right, well, I want to get mentally fitter, I want to get that side of my game sorted, get with your physical program more, try and push that bit more exercise, bit more conditioning in there, and you see the impact perhaps straight away after a session. Oh, I feel better. And right, then you can build that up with some of the other things that we've mentioned.
Awesome. Now, just as we look to wrap up, the final 3 questions I ask all of my guests is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I've mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I think it was a doctor who said it to me. And it's sort of a play on the George Harrison record where he said, all things must pass. And that for me is a very powerful quote in saying that everything's only for a time. Now that's for your good, to keep you grounded, that if things are going well, you know, you're not a superstar, you're not a hero, if there's something that can come and bite you in the arse and take you back down. But also if things are going badly, that won't last forever, you come out the end of it. So I'd say that, yeah, all things must pass.
Awesome. Now, what's your definition of success?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've heard lots of people's responses to this and was trying to think what I would say to it. But I think success is knowing in yourself that you've done your best. And there's some external things that you can be validated by, but if you're going home at the end of a game or whatever you do and you think that what you've done was the best you could, that's success for me.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that. Now finally, why do you play the game of cricket?
I play the game of cricket because it's a team sport that gives you the chess-like element of the tactics, as well as the chance to do things individually. I mean, people shy from that, but it's great if you pick up a 5 or get some runs. But also you can really celebrate the achievements of others. But it's the best sport, the best game, probably the best thing on the planet for me. So I play it for a mixture of things, but it's because even when you lose, you can get something out of it, a talking point, something to use for development. Absolutely.
Now, Mark, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for your time. How can people follow you and sort of get behind Opening Up?
Yeah, you can. We're on Instagram at Opening Up Cricket. We're also on Twitter at Opening Up.